This is week 10 of this thing I'm doing. I'm in a bit of a gaming slump this week. I just beat Metroid Dread. So I bought Breath of the Wild to play through it again, and I got about an hour into it, and then I got bored. So I said that's fine. I've been meaning to play Dragon Ball Raging Blast 2 for the Xbox 360. So I got about an hour into that, and then I got bored. So I said that's fine. I've been meaning to play the original Assassin's Creed for the Xbox 360. So I got about an hour into it, then I got bored, and at this point I'm getting a little concerned. Like I'm having a video game midlife crisis. Like maybe I've outgrown the hobby, and maybe it's time for me to grow up a little and stop playing video games for fun. No! Anyways, enough of that. Each week this summer, I'm working on 3 separate projects. For these projects, I'll be using MuseScore for music, Maya for 3D, and Godot for games, along with a handful of others. Let's get it.
Hey man, check out what I got.
Getting a little tough to keep editing the GT score side of this video each week. I can only explain so much about the changes I'm making to the music without just repeating myself over and over again. I'll be thinking of some way to make this section a little more engaging rather than just 30 minutes of notation. But just to sum up this week, I kept experimenting with drums, but it never ended up sounding great. It just kinda, well, sounded like drums.
The drumming. Can't you hear it? The drumming, the constant drumming.
The best soundtracks, in my opinion, is where you don't notice the instrumentation playing. What I mean by that is you don't relate a certain instrument to a certain sound in that song. You relate it to just the sounds as a whole. Now that doesn't mean it's bad if a song has an instrument in it, or you can hear a guitar playing. What it does mean is that if you can cherry pick each instrument, in my opinion, the whole song becomes a little less like a score and more like just a series of instruments. Maybe that's just me, but either way I don't want the drums to stick out like a sore thumb. Not a bad week for Muse by any means, just not anything out of the ordinary.
And I was trapped. I, alone, had no body, no senses, no feelings. I was in hell, looking at heaven.
This week I started by fixing the mouth mesh on Gravatar.
You're gonna have to do better than that, Steven! 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 My lisp is gone!
In order to do that, I needed to pin down the UV shell texture to a certain spot at certain measurements, so everything that needed to stay consistent was consistent around the mouth. I did a pretty decent job at that, so I went on to give rigging another shot. I still have some of the same issues, but I'm nipping the issues little by little at the moment. It's mainly skinning. If I could figure out skinning, the arms won't look like that. But before I handle that, I'm trying something new. I'm doing a cave animation in Clip Studio. I started by making a storyboard, individual little squares explaining what motions are going to be happening in the animation. For now, it's just going to be this one shot.
It only takes one bullet. You ain't got the nerve. Try me.
It took me a minute to recall how Clip Studio's animation worked. Once I figured that out, I jotted the basic ideas down for the animation I was hoping to get. Then I went on to the next little mini project for Gravatar. This is Hell Hiss. He's kind of like this demon that follows Gravatar around. He has a scorpion tail, a bug-like body, and a singular eye. I'm going to make a 3D model of him next. Similar to MuseScore, I need to make 100 models before I really get good at modeling. So this is just the next one I'm doing. I started by making an image plane for Hell Hiss. It wasn't as important to me to get the proportions exact like I did with Gravatar, so I just drew roughly what a human proportion would look like. I then modeled the face and the helmet, and then the whole body and the arms. I feel like this whole process is going a lot faster than it did with Gravatar, so I have a feeling I'm going in the right direction with this model. Overall, good week for this project. I started this project this week by working on the Seuss Land theme. I added some nice trumpets, and while it's not a Bubsy sound font, I think it added a lot to the track for sure. I then started on a new track. I mentioned before that Philippine in the game is going to be making sort of a contract with the main weapon of the game in order to use it, kind of like in Persona. So I needed a soundtrack to match that aesthetic. I called this one Contract, and I filtered through the instruments once again, got a solid melody together. What I really liked about this one though is that it had a bit more of a real gritty atmosphere to it. I mentioned before with the GT score that the drums always felt a little out of place, but for this particular track, I used a sort of thud sound. Which is exactly what I was looking for.
That's what we've been waiting for!
So that thud sound added the kick I was needing to make the contract music more impactful, and I'm pretty stoked on it. Now, truth be told, I kind of wasted a lot of time painting the background, unfortunately. Because of the strokes and the patterns not being super consistent, what ended up happening is it just really looked like a bunch of scribbles on the grass instead of a grass pattern. But the biggest issue wasn't even the scribbles, it was the fact that I didn't even stitch the level together right.
You what?
If you remember, I initially put the level together in the editor by screenshotting each section of the level, putting it into Sprite, and then repeating that process until I had the whole level together. Unfortunately, I wasn't really accurate enough with it, so I ended up making the entire level a little too short, a little too narrow to what's actually supposed to look like. It was kind of like a Bizarro version when I was trying to line it up. Overall, it didn't look great, and it didn't fit quite right. So, to try and course correct, I decided to brainstorm and look at Sonic 3 and Kirby Superstar Saga, maybe just to get some inspiration for background design and just kind of steer me in the right path. So I decided I was gonna start over with the screenshots. I first did a proper screenshot on the level, the entire thing, not stitching it together. It was a little harder since there's a lot of Godot UI elements in the way, but worked fine enough. I adjusted parts of the level to put things where I had intended them to be in the background, and then I decided the best idea for the grass texture in the background was just to have a grass layer that was an entire texture. Afterwards, I duplicated that layer, hid the original, and erased where I didn't want the grass to be. Eventually, I took a break from that and I started working more on the secondary soundtrack of the level, and then I called it good for the music. Once I finished that, I then worked on the second half of the Seuss Land level, trimming down the grass layer and getting the mountains and hills looking more correct. I made some more stylistic choices as well. I got rid of those white speckles in the sky, the yellow dots on the ground, and then I decided it'd look better to get rid of the teal grass highlights as well. Still not something I'm stellar about as far as the background goes, but it's an improvement, and truth be told, if I ever want to get this project done before the end of the summer, I need to be okay with some things looking a little less stellar. I got a deadline, and it's 2 months away, so I need to lock in more, or I'll never finish this game. But overall, it was a great week for this project.